65.25 days for the Earth to travel completely around the Sun. So every 4 years, we have an extra day to deal with the time that has accumulated. The day created is leap day, February 29th, which naturally only occurs if you could divide the year date by 4. Perhaps this of all days is the perfect time to take another leap and mention some of the many animals and plants that are almost completely unknown to all but a handful of Londoners. It might be worth remembering that in 1 gram of soil there could be 20 million nematodes, 100,000 mites, 40,000 springtails, 200 different fungi, as well as 1,000 different bacteria, of which only 5% as yet can be accurately identified. Before the creation of microscopes in the late 17th century, no Londoner had ever seen or even imagined what could exist in a drop of pond water. Hairybacks, gastrotricha, are tiny, transparent, flat creatures with blunt, whiskered heads and forked tails. Even professional microscopists miss them, as they always hide, even when viewed down a microscope. Some are large enough that when swimming they can look like flecks of glass in the water. They are famous for laying eggs almost half the size of their body. 20 different species occur in the ponds on Bookham Common, including a contender for London's rarest animal, Ketanotus Ophiogaster intermedia. Also in London ponds are an interesting group of flagellates. Gonium is one that exists as a free-living colony made up of just 4 cells. Pandorina is another, made up of just 16 cells, Euderina 32, and Volvox a few hundred. Many evolutionists believe this group shows closely the steps we ourselves may have taken as we evolved from a single-cell creature to a multicellular one many millions of years ago. Parasites are another group with often hidden, complex and bizarre life cycles. Anyone who has seen parasitic fluke larvae, Cercariae, leaving a host such as a water snail is both amazed and appalled. For example, if a snail overheats, hundreds of worm-like Cercariae simultaneously decide to abandon their host by just boring straight out of any part of its body wall. Some parasitic water fleas look for all the world like miniature monsters. Anchistrapus imaginatus is one with a fearsome sword-like beak the length of its body, which it plunges into its victims, in this case hydras. They then indiscriminately rip their hosts apart using their legs to waft pieces of its flesh to their mouths. Parasitic amoebas, such as Hydroamoeba hydroxina, literally eat their hosts alive, cell by cell, till all that is left is a few hundred amoebas. Hairworms, Nematomorpha, are equally gruesome. It used to be thought they spontaneously generated themselves from hairs that fell out of a horse's tail. We usually only ever notice them when we accidentally squash an insect, and a worm almost the size of the insect itself is ejected from its body cavity. February was a time when Londoners used to complain about fleas, as they tend to get more active towards the end of winter. Their jumping ability is legendary, with some being capable of jumping several hundred times an hour for several days looking for a new meal. It is said if one was the size of a man and stood on the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral, it would be able to leap straight over the dome. On a lighter note, micromoths are another group hardly known to most of us. They're just tiny moths which, because of their larger and more colourful relations, just tend to get ignored. However, there are 1,000 of them, mainly straw, beige or fawn in colour. We do notice those that eat our clothes, as well as some of the more unusual, such as longhorns, plume moths, ermines and leaf miners. Others likely to catch our attention are the grass moths, Crambinae, which we often see running through the grass during summer picnics. Stoneworks, Caraceae, are yet another curious group. They look like delicate underwater horsetails, but are in actual fact algae, but so different they're in a class of their own. They tend to appear after ponds have been dredged, but only as long as the water is crystal clear and unpolluted. They are usually coarse to the touch due to an encrusting of lime. What is unique about them is that they can have individual cells up to 5 centimeters long, which makes them the longest plant cells in the world. Several species turn up from time to time in London's canals and ditches, but Basingstoke Canal has long been the most reliable place to find them. Nostoc is equally unusual. It's a cyanobacterium that is capable of creating blooms in lakes, yet also lives on paths where it remains invisible until there is a shower of rain, when suddenly the path is covered in small gelatinous balls. It is hardly surprising that they were called witch's jelly. It would be quite easy to continue describing unusual creatures which are poorly worked upon and therefore relatively unknown, but before finishing, water bears, tardigrade, have to be mentioned. Their preferred habitat is the film of water that covers the surface of mosses. Here they clamber about, looking for all the world like miniature transparent bears, with their 8 legs ending in claws rather than the 4 you might expect. There can only be a handful of Londoners that could identify any of the 13 species recorded on Bookham Common and the 5 recorded in Buckingham Palace Gardens. Various fascinating aspects of their biology are worth mentioning, not least their amazing ability to survive extreme conditions. They have been known to resuscitate themselves from 1 degree above absolute zero. At minus 272 degrees centigrade, the molecular state of cells is substantially altered. Yet within 2 hours, they've been seen on the move again. If they decide to form a cyst to avoid what they regard as adverse conditions, they first molt but remain inside the cast skin. Then they slowly withdraw their legs back into their body and disassemble their organs into an amorphous mass of cells. When the good times return, these cells then reorganize themselves into an entirely new water bear, which then emerges from the cyst. Above all, they're among the most comical of animals to observe. I have seen one fall through a drop of water, bounce on the microscope slide, and then rear up on its legs, a little like a grizzly bear, and stare straight up the barrel of the microscope to what must have looked like a supernova, but was actually my eye.